Basics of Ecology Part 3. Interactions or relationships between living organisms and their physical environment. Changes in abiotic factors, non-living components of the environment or physical factors such as climatic factors and edaphic factors affect the distribution of organisms and size of populations. For example, most organisms adapt to live in specific weather conditions. Weather includes sunlight and its intensity, rainfall, humidity, and temperature. Their population increases when conditions are favorable and reduces when conditions become unfavorable. Okay, when we talk about abiotic factors, we simply mean elements of the environment which are without life. That abiotic means without life. We can use physical factors as a synonym. Now we are going to subdivide abiotic factors into two main categories. That to say, climatic factors, factors linked or related to the climate, and edaphic factors. Edaphic, it comes from Greek edaphos, and edaphos means the ground, the soil, the earth. So both the climate and the soil properties are going to determine the distribution of different species of living organisms in their environment. Let us now begin with the climatic factors, and the first case will be rainfall or precipitation. The rainfall precipitation avails the water in the nature, and this water is going to be required by especially plants for the purpose of photosynthesis. And once the vegetation is set, this is going to attract herbivorous animals, which ones are also going to attract carnivorous animals. So without water, there is no vegetation. Without no vegetation, there is no fauna. Remember that the fauna is the set of all animals we have in a given environment, and here in our case we deal with herbivores and carnivores. Humidity. The humidity is very important for living organisms too. For plants, for example, we know that when the atmosphere is humid, stomata are going to behave differently in case when the atmosphere is dry. For example, when the atmosphere is dry, plants are going to lose water by evapotranspiration, but when it is humid, the evapotranspiration is going to be sensibly reduced. So the vegetation is going to entirely depend on which amount of water or water vapors are in the air or atmosphere. The temperature, we know that the temperature is highly required for the activity of enzymes, but when it exceeds an optimum level, enzymes can be denatured and metabolic reactions are going to stop, which can lead to the death of living organisms. We know that also the temperature is going to influence the behavior of living organisms when it triggers, for example, the hibernation and the estivation. Remember that the hibernation is the condition when in cold conditions, especially in winter, an animal is going to hide in a warmer place where it is going to remain until favorable conditions are back. And the opposite will be estivation, where a living organism is going to hide in a cool place until again favorable conditions are back. So the hibernation it occurs in winter or in extremely cold conditions, while estivation occurs in summer or in extremely hot conditions. Light is the major source of energy in nature. where it is used by plants for photosynthesis. Light is used also or required for the seed germination in some species. We should remember that normally plants require three main factors for the seed germination, that is say humidity or presence of water in the soil, warmth or temperature, and air or oxygen. Other requirements such as light, chemicals, smoke, fire are going to be required depending on particular plant species. Light is also going to influence the distribution of organisms in water. For example, in a water body like a lake, etc., the deep zones are not going to receive light, and therefore photosynthesis will not be possible. And if photosynthesis is not possible, plants will not survive there, that to say in dark, deep zones of the water body. And if plants are not going to survive there, herbivores and carnivores will not be attracted to the darker zones too. That to say, life is going to be possible only in the upper layers of the water body where light can reach to allow photosynthesis, obviously. Light is also going to influence the reproduction of organisms, and we can take the example of plants here, and should know that normally we classify plants in three categories according to their light requirements. Then we will have long day plants, short day plants, and neutral day plants. And now here we have plants that require a longer exposure to light in order to produce or to make flowers. Plants that require a moderate amount of light to make flowers, and others which are independent to the amount of light in order to make flowers. Light is also important for the activities of animals. We know that some animals are known as nocturnal, like owls, bats, etc. They are going to carry out their activities during the night when light is absent, while others, known as diurnal, like humans, they are going to carry out their activities during the day when light is available. Light is also used by the skin for the production of vitamin D, and that vitamin D is going to allow bones to absorb calcium in order to become tough, rigid, and resistant. Another factor is the wind or air currents. We know that the wind plays a very important role in the dispersal or distribution of seeds and fruits and spores in order to allow plants to occupy new territories, thus preventing them from competing. Wind also determines the rate of evapotranspiration in plants. We know that in windy conditions, plants lose more water than they do in sunny conditions. Wind also is a very good pollinating agent. It assumes the transport of pollen grains from one plant to another or from one flower to another. It also influences the rain formation and distribution. That will say the amount of rain received by a given area will be determined also by the amount of wind it receives. And finally, the soil erosion. We know that also wind is responsible of many natural hazards like the soil erosion, mentioned here, the destruction of properties or even death of living organisms such as animals and plants. The atmospheric pressure. The atmospheric pressure, first of all, is going to determine the amount or the partial pressure of oxygen available, whereby we know that, for example, in low altitudes, both the atmospheric pressure and the partial pressure of oxygen are higher than at the top of mountains or in higher altitudes where the atmospheric pressure and partial pressure of oxygen are low. Water. Water is a universal solvent and a medium of chemical reactions. We know that all metabolic reactions, anabolic and catabolic ones, that occur in living organisms require the presence of water. Water is a medium of transport. Without water, blood is not able to assume the distribution of different chemicals like nutrients, hormones, etc. into our body. Water is a medium of aquatic animals and plants. We know that a very big number of animal and plant species live in water as their habitat. Water is a raw material for photosynthesis and it provides support in plant tissues. We know that thanks to water, plants are able to make their own food and avail it to other living organisms too. What is going also to allow herbaceous plants, let's say plants with a flexible and weak stem, to get an upright position in order to maximize the absorption of sunlight. Water is going to assume a cooling effect during transpiration in both animals and plants, and it will assume the distribution of terrestrial organisms. We know that we can classify living organisms according to their requirements in water and determine their natural habitats. We have, for example, if we consider the case of plants, we have the xerophytes which grow in dry areas. We have the hydrophytes or aquaphytes which require an area rich in water like swamps. We have also the mesophytes which are plants requiring a moderate amount of water. Edaphic factors. These are factors related to the soil, like to its structure and type, to its pH, to its salinity and topography. The structure and type of soil affects porosity, drainage and humus content. What is the porosity? The porosity refers to the presence of air spaces between soil particles. And this porosity is very important because it determines the capacity of the soil to absorb water and avail it to roots of plants. Remember that most plant species are able to absorb water only by the use of their roots, while so few species of plants are able to absorb water using their hollow surface. Drainage. Drainage is the capacity of removing water out of soil. Like for example, when swamps are being prepared for cultivation, a very huge amount of water is taken out in order to make the land available for agriculture, and that's what we call drainage. Once again, if you take the case of sand and clay, the drainage is higher in sand and lower in clay. The humus content. The humus is the organic composition of the soil. That to say, the dead matter is going to be broken down by bacteria and fungi to make what we call the humus in order to increase the fertility of the soil. The pH of the soil. This refers to the acidity and alkalinity of the soil. Obviously, when the soil is acid or when it is alkaline, it cannot shelter the same species of plants. And as you know, specific types of plants will attract specific types of herbivores, and specific types of herbivores will attract specific types of carnivores. The salinity. The salinity is the salty composition of the soil, the presence of salt in the soil. Obviously, as we have been talking about the pH, the amount of salt present in the soil will determine also the type of vegetation that should be found in a given area. Topography. The topography is the description of the land. Here we have graphy, okay, meaning description, and the topo meaning the land, the soil, ground, etc. Now let us take this case of mountains. Mountains act as a physical barrier to migration or to the movements of animals that are leaving one place to another one. Thus they can contribute to the isolation of a species, thus preventing or reducing the genetic flow between a population and another one. The altitude. We know that as you move to the top of a mountain, or as you move to a higher altitude, the partial pressure of oxygen becomes less, and also this goes with the temperature. As you move upwards a mountain, the temperature is going to decrease too, and both the partial pressure of oxygen and the level of temperature are also going to influence the distribution of living organisms, both plants and animals. We have finally the slope that is going to influence the water runoff and the vegetation. Size of populations in ecosystems. There are many factors that influence the size of populations in their ecosystems. Natality or birth rate. This is the rate at which new members are added to a population by reproduction. In any community, the birth of a young one increases the population size. The mortality or death rate. This is the rate at which individuals die out to reduce the population size. Immigration rate. The rate at which individuals move into a population from outside to increase the population size. Immigration rate. This is the rate at which individuals move out of a population to reduce its size. Natural calamities. We have examples like drought, famine, floods, fire, and earthquakes that cause large-scale deaths or emigrations of populations, leading to massive population change. Food and space. These are the major limiting factors for animal populations. When food, water, and space are plenty, population increases in size, otherwise it will reduce. All factors are listed here above can be grouped into two categories. Density dependent factors. These are factors whose effect depends on the size of the population. For example, competition, predation, pollution, and reproductive rates. Others are independent factors. Their effect does not depend on the size of the population. For example, the amount of rainfall, light received, the altitude of the area, the topography, and the landscape. Population growth curves. A population growth curve is the trend a population follows in its growth during a period of time. The sigmoid growth curve, or S-shaped curve. The sigmoid growth curve is the most common growth pattern in nature, especially for organisms growing in an environment with limited resources. For example, paramecia and bacteria in a culture medium. Here below, we are provided with a graph which is going to allow us to understand different properties of such a growth curve, meaning the sigmoid growth curve. The sigmoid population growth curve. Here we are presented with a population that is settled in a new environment. And first of all, individuals are going to adapt to the new climate, the new type of food, etc. And then the population is supposed to grow slowly, and this will be referred to as the lag phase. The lag phase is going to be followed by the log phase, and the log phase is where there is the fastest population growth. It is referred to also as the exponential population growth. Why? Here the birth rate exceeds the death rate as the population has adapted to a new environment. So food is available, the population has adapted to a new climate, and the other problems offered by any new environment, and then the population is growing as fast as possible. Now, when the population is large enough, problems are going to occur, like disease, like intra and inter specific competitions, like violent conflicts, which are going to lead to the increase of the death rate and decrease of the birth rate. Then we have the stationary growth of a population, where the birth rate and death rate are balanced, or they are at equilibrium, and this stationary growth phase will be followed by the decline phase. The decline phase is when the population is going to decrease sensibly, meaning that the birth rate is going to be very lower than the death rate.